Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to NAUI's Dive Team Report. I'm your host, Greg Martin. You know, there are a great many dive sites around the world that are high on people's lists. But there's one that tops my list, and oddly enough, it's a man-made pool. A big one, but it's a pool nonetheless. That one of these days, I hope to be able to jump in and get wet in. Craig Shannon is the interim manager of dive operations at NASA's Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory. And Craig, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Greg.
And I am correct, interim manager at this point?
That is correct. I am the NBL Dive Operations interim manager.
Okay. Now, if anybody is familiar with it, I mean, it's a big pool of water. But if you're not familiar with what the Neutral Buoyancy Lab is, Craig, tell us what is this big pool of water?
All right. Well, basically, it's a 40-foot deep pool, 20 feet above ground, 20 feet below ground. It's about 100 feet wide and 200 feet long, and it holds almost 6.2 million gallons.
That's a lot of water.
It is quite a bit of water. We heat it to 86 degrees, and that's mainly for diver comfort, also for astronaut comfort. Inside of the pool, we've got a mock-up of all the United States and some of the European space agencies and Japanese space station mock-ups.
So you hop into this thing with astronauts wearing full basic EVA kind of gear, like they would be using in outer space, and you have divers hop in to assist them with different things, yes?
That's correct, yes.
You know, any time that I've had the opportunity to do any kind of presentations for service clubs and organizations, schools, whatnot, I always make sure that I make the connection between the underwater world and outer space world. So what's it like to dive in this pool and assist the astronauts with the training of their space missions? Well,
by far it is the probably the coolest dives I've ever made. And on a daily basis, I don't dive quite as much as I used to, but on a daily basis, I look forward to my 4+ hours underwater every day. We do have probably the best visibility in the world, since it is an indoor heated pool that's chlorinated, and it's kind of just a pretty neat experience watching the astronauts do their work.
So what did the divers wind up doing? And I know this is not a perfect world. I know this isn't an exact simulation of being in outer space, because obviously we're still dealing with gravity, and we're dealing with the friction of water, so that things aren't as perfect as we would like them to be. But I know that it's really closer to what outer space would be like. What do the divers wind up doing in this case?
So typically what our goal is with astronauts is to get them pretty much neutrally buoyant, where they can rotate around in the spacesuit in a 360-degree axis if needed. For us, we have, I guess, typically 4 divers per astronaut. There's 2 safety divers that are there to assist with any emergencies that happen, way outs, the umbilical, which has the gas flow to the suit, also communications and cooling. And we hand them like light tools, things like that, and then swim them around in the station, or to different parts of the station that they cannot translate to. Then you have a utility diver that hands larger tools and does setup and reconfiguration during the run. And then there's a video float diver that holds the camera so that we get all our great underwater footage, but also all over NASA, as well as different entities watch that.
So these astronaut trainees, or they're in the actual process of then training for a particular space mission, is that right?
That's correct. And typically, right now we have a bunch of astronaut candidates that just started, so they'll be getting in the suit. They start their runs in March, and then they go through the whole entire astronaut candidate flow, which could be 6 months to years later, until they get past and actually become astronauts. We also do currently around 3 to 4 days of suited operations, and those are for the astronauts that are going up. and a lot of maintenance runs. That is what we're doing now. We're not building any more of the station. We're just maintaining it much like you would your car. We have to change out batteries. You have cooling tanks you have to replace, different on-orbit replacement units.
So this is all simulation at this point.
It is, but we do have life-size mock-ups in the pool that are pretty functional. They don't, batteries obviously, for example, don't have, just volumetric mock-ups. They don't have power or anything underwater, but they do remove those and then reinstall new ones and translate around the station. They have ammonia tanks that are pretty large. They're about the size of a small car, like a Prius or something, and they just kind of do a lot of different training like that.
How about the divers themselves? I mean, what does it take to become one of these assistants?
Well, our dive staff varies. We have divers like myself. I was a scuba instructor in college, and then when I graduated, I was looking at various things and applied here over 15 years ago and got hired on. We have ex-Navy divers, we've had Army divers, ex-commercial divers, all the way to kids that have just got out of college, and we're scientific divers in different diving backgrounds.
So any particular specialized training that it takes to become one of these divers?
Well, minimum standards are minimum. They're typically for people that are in-house, like IT people or somebody that might want to move over to us. But they are like, I think it's 25 hours. You have to be certified for a year is all the basic requirements. Most of our applicants will have hundreds, if not thousands, of dives coming in. So it's pretty, we'd like to see a well-rounded person who is good with small tools, mechanically inclined, but also, of course, has diving experience.
Sure. Now, correct me on this if I'm wrong. Is this kind of an open kind of thing where you can apply to come in and be one of these divers for a while on a non-pay basis, or am I confused on that?
No, well, we have what we call guest divers, but what they're actually people that typically work at NASA and are supporting one of the runs, or astronauts, or occasionally we have had some film crews that have come in and made some dives, but for the most part, that's what's limited to. We don't allow even people who work in the building or at NASA don't necessarily get approved to come and dive. They have to have a specific reason.
Interesting. I'm glad I was clarified on that particular thing. So Craig, I want to become one of these divers. How do I go through that process, man?
All right. So we, even though we are NASA, there are basically a handful of contractors that hire, and what we typically do is whenever I'm looking, I'll reach out to local dive shops that I know, the university programs, and then we also post the positions on various websites looking for that, particularly company websites. And then we just get our pool of applicants and narrow it down and start the interview process. And the interview process typically takes 2 to 3 months to get somebody through the interview process before we can offer positions.
Nice. Well, it sounds like an absolutely fascinating thing to do, to be able to assist in the space program while yet being underwater. And I know I've looked at all the pictures and I've watched video, and it just absolutely fascinating way of doing this, and an important part of tying the realm of underwater world to the outer space world together, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. It's the closest thing we can get to being in space is being underwater. So that's why we train and are training pretty regularly. Nice.
Well, if you have questions about this, you guys have a website, right, that has a lot of information about this?
We do have a website. I'm not sure of the exact address on the top of my head, but I know you can Google it and find it. And it does have general information on it. And also, I believe NASA's JSC page does as well.
Sure, sure. Well, go check it out if you have an interest in doing something like that. Keep your eyes and ears open for any upcoming opportunities that the NASA Neutral Buoyancy Lab may have. And Craig, I want to say thanks for spending some time talking with us about this. It's another aspect of the diving world that we wouldn't normally think about. We talk about careers once in a while, about different ways of getting into this business and staying in this business. But this one would be just an absolutely fascinating way to tie those two worlds together. So again, thanks for taking some chance and talking with an old diver about the world of underwater in outer space, or outer space underwater.
Well, thank you for taking time to interview me as well.
All right. Well, listen, if you have an interest in learning to dive, be sure and check out your local NAUI dive shop. You can also check out NAUI online at naui.org, naui.org. And again, your local NAUI dive shop, check in with those folks because it's a fantastic, fascinating underwater world. And again, thanks to Craig Shannon, interim manager at the dive operations at NASA's Neutral Buoyancy Lab, for joining us today. That's going to wrap it up for this episode of NAUI's Dive Team Report. I'm Greg Martin. Thank you for listening. I'll see you underwater.